So once again, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to do a formal introduction of our speakers from Buro Happold, and they are speaking on collaborative urban well-being regeneration, and they're going to be speaking into two specific examples in the UK, which you're really excited to hear about. I know they've got a presentation that they're going to share with you, so you will be able to see some content as well. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jamie Anderson. Jamie leads Buro Happold's urban flourishing offer within their UK sustainability team, whilst also working part-time at the University of Manchester. He leads an international wellbeing research team as well. His award-winning PhD was supervised jointly by an urban designer and neuropsychologist at Cambridge University, and he continues to develop interdisciplinary approaches working with digital and analog, quantitative and qualitative techniques. He is fortunate to have worked on a range of projects at varying scales to create and translate good well-being evidence in varied practitioner and policy settings, largely in the UK, but also in the US and in the Middle East. And Jamie's also passionate about collaborative approaches that embrace the complexity of well-being, which he finds at times disorienting, but also richly rewarding. And then Vaishali, I'm going to speak about her as well, because she is joining Dr. Jamie on this talk. They're going to do it collaborative style. She is an engineer with Buro Happold's sustainability team, focusing on how to bring people and planet to the forefront of design. She's worked on a range of projects from building scale design to policy recommendations for local governments and charities. She works towards the creation of a more socially equitable and climate just industry. Vaishali is passionate about rethinking norms, collaborating with communities we are creating places for, and monitoring metrics that matter to them. So that is a mouthful. I want to give that mouthful because often some of the speakers don't share all the incredible things that they do. And it gives you some context into who they are, where they're coming from, the experience and the knowledge that they have to offer. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And I'm going to hand it over to you to share your screen and share your presentation with us.
Okay, can I just check you can see the screen? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Great, super. So, thank you very much for the introductions, and lovely to meet you all. I'm Jamie, and joined by Charlie. We really glad of the opportunity, and just to flag really quickly on my side, I work part-time for Manchester University, and one of the case studies was led by the university rather than Buro Happold, but we'll come back to that later. And so we're going to talk about two case studies, and we've got a slightly ambitious agenda in the sense that we only wanted to speak for a maximum of 20 minutes and have plenty of room time, to speak afterwards, conversation and discuss things. So we're going to try and get through in under 20 minutes. I'm going to take I think the longest slot with the Manchester case study, because that research is pretty much finished up now, and we can talk about the full evaluation, or most of it. And then Charlie's going to follow up with a London example in Brent Cross Town, and then we're going to wrap up with 2 or 3 slides of concluding thoughts, interpretation and reflections, and finish with a question as well from us. So just very quickly, again, just wanted to flag that both these case studies are really highly multifaceted, and we, in the interest of time, we're just focusing on specific threads. But please feel free to contact us, at any stage, whether if something gets covered or not. So yeah, without further ado, a little bit of background. So we we come at this, especially in terms from urban regen perspective and the evidence base, especially from anecdotal perspective, and now increasingly correlational evidence perspective. There's good evidence that that positive, good planning, design, management, it can be associated with well-being behaviours, and subjective well-being, literal well-being in itself, and in particular for urban greening. So improving people's exposure to greening and access to greening interventions. But we need more intervention evidence. We need, to better inform policy and practice decisions. And so there's a growing consensus that natural experiments are possibly one of the most feasible ways to assess causality and, step beyond these correlational kind of snapshots in, data collected at one moment in time, and try to do before and after type evaluations and research. So this just really quickly, just to say a little bit more about what I mean by natural experiment. This is a diagram from Nesta, an innovation centre in the UK, and it's basically showing how we're striving for this kind of level 3 of evidence, and it's about before and after data collection, and it's about researchers, not usually anyway, sometimes there are exceptions, but not usually influencing the interventions themselves. They occur naturally, they'd happen anyway, and it's about trying to show before and after, and have a counterfactual, so be comparing your intervention group or area to a control or comparison group, or which may be one group or more, and it's going beyond what in industry is sometimes referred to as post-occupancy evaluation, where you collect just data after people move into an area or a building. And so back in 2016, myself and others at Manchester University, led by Jack Benton, we undertook a review of the strongest natural experiment studies, especially for physical activity outcomes. And we looked at thousands of abstracts, but we concentrated in the end on 12 of the strongest, and basically found that they're not that strong. We concluded that 3/4 of these studies had critical bias, and the remaining quarter had a serious risk of bias. And on the back of that, we then made 8 recommendations for improvement in this area of research, which I'm not going to go through now, but basically they underpin most of our approach and what we do going forwards, and these case studies we will go through. So as part of that, addressing those 8 recommendations, a key thing is truly collaborative working, and doing this together in partnership. So in both cases we're striving for this what's sometimes referred to as a quadruple helix approach, where you essentially trying to work together with government, industry, community, and academia all coming together to try and collect this data, do it in salient ways, and to do it robustly. So Charlie, who's going to speak after I've presented the Manchester study, she's going to concentrate in particular on the community strand within the work we did at Brent Cross, because in the interest of time we just won't be able to cover it all. But yeah, so that's a little bit of background, scene setting. Now I was going to jump into the Manchester case, and this is an area in Manchester where the actual intervention took place. It's a really highly deprived area, historically in the most 10% most deprived areas of the UK, and it's a post-industrial area. It has bits of industry at the edges. It's also at very high risk of flooding. There's the river that runs through and at the edge of the site, and can be prone to flash flooding. We came to this at the end of a 10-year housing-led regen program. We came to it when the spaces between the buildings were still very poor, basically very poor quality brownfields, amenity spaces, but very low grade, and bits of flooding, etc. Then basically we worked with the community to intervene, and I'm not going to be able to go into the, that co-design process, but just wanted to summarize the intervention and what was agreed and what was built out. And this is a sustainable park in the sense that it's a sponge park. So if there are flash flooding, then rain water from the pavements and the roads will be taken into the park and underneath the park where it's retained for the planting. So it's basically quite clever engineering solutions. And then the park itself, the new park, can be broken down into 3 key areas. So in the north, a woodland area where the community wanted to, in particular, improve the provision for children. So lots of play area, a climbing wall, basketball, various play equipment, and there's quite a lot of established trees there already. Then the middle section is meadow area, which is a bit like a meadow. It has lots of rain gardens, lots of seating and picnic areas, and then to the south, a community area, which is more hard landscaped. It's more set up, for events, and it has an allotment area, but uses permeable surfaces for the water issues. So just to give a really quick feel for like the before and after, this is at baseline back in kind of 2018-19. One of the areas in the top corner of the site, and then the same angle, same perspective after the intervention. Once the sponge park was built out, again before and after, different angle, but yeah, really highly run down area with lots of environmental problems, and quite a drastic improvement. And so in terms of our research approach, essentially it's a mixed methods approach and repeated cross-sectional natural experiments. So essentially that means that we collected data with the same community each time, but not necessarily the same individuals. On occasion there will be the same individuals, but most of the time it's the same community. And then the primary outcome that we adopted was for walking. The community wanted to be able to walk to this provision, in their immediate vicinity. And we also collected data on 4 additional wellbeing activities, which I'll come back to and I'll unpack in a later slide. In terms of the measures, we used Mohawk, which is a systematic tool we've been building and testing for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's sort of quite literally observing people in their environment. You can do it manually with pen and paper, or you can do it on a digital tablet or a phone. And then we also collect intercept survey data as well. So that's like literally intercepting people in public spaces, local public spaces, and streets around the area. And we asked people about their use of the space, and we also collected some social well-being data using a new tool we've created called Nourish. But if anyone's got questions about that, I can say more about that, but we haven't got it in the slides today. We collected all this data in the intervention sites, but also 4 comparison sites, two main comparison sites, which were matched using a 5-step matching process to ensure that we're comparing apples with apples and not apples with pineapples, as it were. And there'll be 2 other displacement comparison sites as well. And finally, we did a little bit on what's sometimes referred to as a process evaluation. So this essentially is talking to the community about the hows and the whys of why, why, for example, the intervention may or may not have worked. Very quickly, a timeline diagram, just to show we collected the Mohawk data before and the intercept data before in 2019 in August, and then in June for the intercept. And then the intervention was built out mostly during lockdown and COVID, beginning of the pandemic. Then it was opened and we were able to collect after data in 2021 in August, again repeating same time of year each time, and twice for the Mohawk data, just once for the intercept. In terms of the Mohawk data collection. We had a really kind of quite strict observation schedule, so we'd go and collect data for 4 periods of the day. So first thing in the morning, mid-morning, lunchtime, and then a kind of early evening. We'd also collect it on 3 days across the week. So Wednesday, Thursdays, and a weekend day, usually Saturday. So in terms of the results, so this is the primary outcome measure, which was for walking, and the graph shows average hourly counts for walking, and the green line is in the intervention site, and as you can see, is an increase at follow-up, and then the first follow-up, and then again at the second follow-up. The grey is the comparison, the counterfactual, and that basically goes down at both follow-ups. And I think we're just quite literally just finished analysing this data, and we think this is likely because of people working more from home, and that's why we saw fewer people out walking in the comparison sites. We used a regression model to show to show that the substantial effects and statistically significant, and in terms of substantial, the large effects, so 118% increase at the first follow-up, and then 244% increase at the second follow-up, so really substantial. In terms of the secondary measures that we use using the Mohawk tool, there's 4 of them. So we have vigorous physical activity, which is basically cycling and running, sedentary activity, which is people coming to the park or the space to sit, to stand around, even lie down in the space. Connecting, that's people we observe to be talking and listening to each other, but also maybe they're just walking through holding hands or linked arms. Taking notice, that's basically being mindful of people showing that they're observing their environments, so external environment. So it may be that they're enjoying the new plants and the flora and fauna, or more likely it's actually they're enjoying other people, so they're people watching, just being around other people. And what we see is the same really similar pattern for vigorous activity as we saw for walking. So an increase, a follow-up first, and then another increase at second follow-up. But the other activities, we see sometimes very very big change at first follow-up, and then that reduces at second follow-up. And we're just literally starting to interpret this data at the moment, but it's likely potentially that's due to like an adaptation. So people at first had the novelty of this new park, but then they've kind of adapted a bit. But nonetheless, the follow-up is still, really substantial changes. And so, as I mentioned before, we also collected self-report data as well. So it's important to ask people who you may not have seen in these spaces, about their experiences. And so we did this with over 600 people, and we see substantial increase in reported use of these spaces, these outdoor spaces at follow-up. People on average were starting to use the spaces at least 2 to 3 times a week. But the increase in the intervention area is twice as big. So I think it's likely that in the comparison areas, the pandemic probably prompted people to use the outdoor spaces more often, but we see twice as big an increase in the intervention area. And so this is basically further evidence of that the Mohawk observations are making sense, and they corroborate those. So as I say, we're going to have a bit of interpretation at the end of the interpretation of the findings, etc. But I'm going to pass you now on to Charlie to talk about the London case.
Thanks, Jamie. So yes, I'll talk about Brent Cross Town. Brent Cross Town is in North London, just inside the North Circular Ring Road, and this area is also highly deprived, and it also has a range of ethnicities too. On to the next slide. I'll talk a bit more about. Okay, thank you. So Brent Cross Town is a joint venture regeneration master plan, and the joint venture is between Argent and Barnet London Borough. It's mainly aims to have a lively town centre with flourishing neighbourhoods, and a big part of it are the green spaces around. And it also has loads of aspects that would be contributing to good wellbeing, so 25,000 new jobs, for example, improved schools, like I said, the community spaces, green spaces. So yeah, all round, hopefully a good one for the wellbeing. And there are 4 main pledges.
Charlie, sorry, I was messaging you undercover there. There's a bit of an echo. I don't know if there is anything you can do to change the audio. It's a bit of a struggle to hear. I don't know if something needs to be turned off. Sorry to disturb you. I was just checking if you can, otherwise
try and take out my headphones potentially. Is this better?
Speak a little bit more.
Is this better? Is this less echo?
No, it's still the same.
Oh, I'm not too sure.
It's not too bad. I think we'll bear. Yeah, we can carry on. I just wanted to see if there was a way to fix it.
Sorry, everyone. Maybe if I talk a bit quieter, so it's not so echoey. So
that actually sounds good.
Okay, good. Let me know if it goes again. So where was I? So yeah, I was talking about the 4 main pledges of Brent Cross Town. Other pledges are involved the climate goals, transport and green spaces, but the work that we were doing was based around a flourishing neighbourhood. So a senior partner at Argent describes it as, we're creating a new way to measure how well the people at Brent Cross Town are doing, and in turn how well we're doing at Flourishing Index for all. Next slide. So in the same way as the Manchester case, we use mixed methods. So there were 5 different data collection modes we used. So the first being routinely collected national survey data. In the UK, there's quite good data around wellbeing, but this was useful to compare to this bespoke survey that we set up. On to the next. So the next methods were bespoke local data collection, which is really important and part of this community engagement side. First step for us was to make sure that we're getting the right questions to ask the survey before we send out the survey to lots of people. So we set up these interviews, community workshops, which I'll go on to in the next slide. And this was used, the discussion around health and wellbeing within that, and our learnings from that were used to inform the research questions and the surveys that we ended up putting out. So that's the next collection mode. So that was done through online surveys, that bespoke survey, and also just approaching people on the street, and behaviour observation, and finally navigation sensors. And then the next slide. So going into more detail about this first stage, the interview community workshop stages. Like I said before, it was about really trying to understand what the key issues and the key changes desired for the area and the local community, what they felt about it. And we centred this around 3 open questions. I think maybe a bit of a lag, Jamie?
Oh, Charlie, we lost you then for a second.
Oh no.
Try,
Can you hear me okay?
let's soldier on.
Soldier on, is it?
Yeah.
Is it still?
That's better. That's better.
Okay. I'll let me know if you lose me again. So in terms of approach, we got some guidance from these different institutes, so from NIHR and also this UK What Works Wellbeing Centre. But at the moment, there's not really a clear guidance or a relevant guidance for what we were trying to do. So this is the approach that we took. We recruited 19 community members and leaders, and we put on these workshops that were online because of the pandemic, and we asked open questions during these. the University of Manchester. So Jamie and myself facilitated. The next slide, is this audio okay still?
Shirley, we're noticing that the camera that we can see you on, when you face that direction, it sounds good. Yes. Or like when you speak to that screen.
Okay.
Yes.
That's okay, great. That's probably what it is. So the first of the open questions is, what would it mean for you to be healthy and well? And there were discussions around all these different things on the screen, and some of the ones that came out as a big priority for people is a sense of community and well-being, and also good mental and physical health. On to the next screen. So the second and third open questions were around what kind of things people wanted to see change locally, and that didn't mean necessarily health and well-being, but things like community and well-being came up again, but also access to green space, and also affordability of new regeneration that's happening, making sure that's affordable. And so those were the highest priorities for them. On to the next slide. So this is the last slide. So from those community workshops and the findings and the learnings we had, we needed to translate this into the surveys, and the survey that we can send out to everyone, also the bigger sample size. And so we took two approaches. The first approach was about seeing if any of the concept issues that were raised, we could find a validated research question for them. So for example, in this table on the first line, you can see the sense of community and belonging. We found a question that was already in the survey, in the UK Community Life Survey, about how strongly do you feel you belong to the immediate neighbourhood. But then the other option, the approach was using a bespoke question, and that's if we couldn't find anything that's already existing, but needed to, that was brought up in our community workshop. So for example, diversity of jobs was important when we were talking to the local communities, but that wasn't covered. So that was a question that we put into the survey. That's not part of validated research question that's been used before. On to the next, I think it's to conclusions.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Yeah, so we, as I said at the beginning, we just got 2 or 3 slides of interpretation and roundup, as it were. So yeah, so starting with the Manchester case, you know, we there's evidence already, and we saw this in the Manchester intervention, that the greening interventions can help with resilience to water issues and flooding in particular, but also urban heat island. And we now see, in this intervention research, that the greening has great promise for enabling these well-being activities. And we, in terms of the why and the how, in that process evaluation, we talking to the community, the perceptions of the space have improved drastically, and the salience that these spaces have now for the community, that these are things that they wanted to do anyway, and now they can, and they're much more motivated to do that because they have such a great space to do it in. We also think the involvement of the community is important in terms of explaining why the effects potentially were so large. The other key thing is that this is quite a drastic reduction in inequalities in terms of access to the environment in the immediate area. So people had a very, it was a really low baseline. I think that's also part of why we saw such large effects. And we believe this is a robust, a strong study, a good precedent, and in the future, I think we'd like to collect more panel data. So that's basically the same data from the same individuals before and after, and over time, because I think that will help. And then also a bit more on the subjective well-being. So I mentioned that we did some work with the Nourish tool, which is exploratory work. I think we're going to present that in due course, and we hope to publish that in the next few months. But I think we'd like to do more on the subjective well-being, the literal measures of well-being. But we're really pleased, and as a very proud Mancunian myself, we're really happy to see that this has landed really well in Manchester with policymakers and practitioners, and it's great to see that this demonstrator is being adopted and adapted elsewhere in Greater Manchester, in places where there are flooding issues and also deprivation as well. So, Charlie, do you want to wrap up on London?
Yes. Thank you, Buro, for bearing with me. So the London interpretation, the first interpretation is about process and approach. So firstly, like I mentioned before, we haven't really found a clear and relevant process guidance. There are things that we've pulled from, but it'd be really good to see what others have done in this group, or if anyone's heard of anything, or is this, it's new and upcoming in the industry. And secondly, about size and representation of the community engagement we did. It's hard anyway to get engagement, but particularly during lockdown and pandemic, it was difficult to get participants. And then secondly, the art of matching community voice with robust quantitative survey measures. So this one's about making sure that we balance the qualitative with the quantitative, and that's something we want to explore a bit more, how we can use the words that people have used when we do these surveys and try and translate them and that into our measurements. At the moment, it's easier to do quantitative, but that's something that we definitely want to do more of. And thirdly, like in the Manchester case, we want to do some follow-ups. So that's the exciting part of this too, that we've done the baseline. And moving forward, we want to see in the future to apply this methods approach again, and see any improvements, any places that there's been not so much improvement, and also carry on our community dialogue, and making sure that we get input from the community as we go along, making sure that the flourishing index works for everyone.
Cheers, Charlie. Yeah, so this is the very last slide, and yeah, it does feel like this is potentially uncharted territory. We've had our heads down and been very busy with this, and we recognize that we're potentially missing things out there, but really keen to hear if people know of similar or the same, very similar precedents. At the moment, it feels like this is uncharted territory, and we can see that this collaborative and rigorous approach can generate really strong and salient insight. But I think it does require quite a lot of shift in the culture and the paradigm that we work in, and this involves addressing key challenges. So I've just put 2 or 3 bullets to summarize kind of the challenges we came up against and the things that we believe still need lots of work, but it's doing this in partnership. It's about building and sustaining partnerships. It can be really very difficult at times, even finding the same language, common language, same values. Not everyone places the same emphasis on evidence and quality of evidence, and sometimes it's just quite literally like herding cats, trying to pull everyone together into meetings and keep that momentum up. The need, sometimes there is genuinely just need for innovative methods. We've had to create new tools like Mohawk and Nourish and start them from scratch almost. And sometimes you do need those specialists, and it's really important, sometimes to be advised by a statistician who can, help save you a lot of time by not having to go out and collect data for weeks on end, how to do sampling, etc. Fluid, intervention timelines, they're like moving goalposts. They can be a nightmare for natural experiments. Everyone's working to a certain baseline data collection period, and the intervention is supposed to happen at a certain time, then it doesn't, then it gets moved back, it gets moved forward. There's quite a few things going on often, and of course funding, that's also a big challenge, and we've managed to address some of those things, but now sustaining things is proving also difficult at times. And so that's how we wanted to finish up. Charlotte, do you want to?
And finally, I guess, opening up to everyone, thank you so much for listening. And we wanted to know, if you've combated any of these challenges or got any comments on anything or any questions for us.
Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can go back to group. Yeah.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. That was very interesting. Very much not in my, I'm very green, I would say, to this space. Excuse the pun, because it's not I'm not familiar with this industry, but really, really interesting. And a lot of what you're saying would be amazing to see some of these interventions in South Africa. Hey, Gary. So yeah, this is back to our participants here online. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And as Shali's mentioned, she's given you a leading question. So if there's something that you're wanting to share or contribute, please, raise your hand. And I see some going up. Gary, if you can raise your hand, you will go next. I just want to see how to remove the spotlight so we can see everyone. Okay, brilliant. So we'll start with David, then go to Wendy, and then Gary we'll go to next. I know you haven't put your hand, but you are in my mind to go next. So David, let's start with you.
Thanks very much. I'm very interested in the well-being area generally. I'm still very much a learner in this area. While you were talking, I looked up the Flourishing Index, just Googled it, and I saw the thing from Brent Cross. It came up first, but I noticed that there's this a continued reference to this the Harvard Flourishing Index for Van der Wiele, is it? Is that the basis of your approach?
No. I'm still a little bit out of touch with what the Harvard School is doing, but they're doing I think what I can say, very similar and related things, but not in the context of urban regeneration.
No.
No, so a lot of the thinking and the model that we're applying here, it comes from my previous supervisor and the Wellbeing Institute at Cambridge, and especially what Felicia and colleagues refer to as a textured model for measuring flourishing and well-being, positive mental health, and I think a lot of what we've done is rooted in the European Social Survey work in particular, which is a really big and systematic study of well-being.
Yeah, it's very fascinating how there seems to be a kind of divide, where American writers behave as if Europe doesn't exist, and so, to some extent, and it's interesting to see what crossovers and learnings you could see. But no, I think I'm very interested in the OECD's approach, but again, there's big overlaps in terms of the people. It's a really interesting field, I think, and of course, it's highly relevant to the wellbeing economy stuff that we're doing. It's just, it's all about a holistic approach, isn't it, really? And just, you were saying, so that comment about quantum physics, which I think was on the website, about how complex things are. And I mean, that's the thing, is everything's interlinked at the same time. They're not causal relationships necessarily, and so on. It's really fascinating, but tricky.
Thank you so much, David, for those comments as well. Let's go on to Wendy.
Yes, thank you both. Very interesting. There are a couple of things. One, I don't know if you're familiar with Child Friendly Cities, but they've done some fantastic work on urban design. So one of my questions was, to what degree were children and young people involved in the surveys? Second, there is a Scottish initiative. I was trying to look it up as you were talking. It's either called Placeholder or Space. It's either Place or Space, but they're doing fantastic work on an online tool to do with urban and community involvement in urban planning. And thirdly, I work with Harvard amongst other things. So I've done an evaluation of global well-being indicators across the world. And one of my projects, that's been the focus. So I'll be really happy to share with you a kind of really comprehensive level of all the questions that are being asked globally across all areas through the Flourish project. So I'll contact you afterwards because I think you'd find it very, very interesting. But yeah, I'm very embedded in this conversation. But Child Friendly Cities has been doing very interesting work.
Great, oh, great, thank you, Wendy. But yeah, so I for 5 years or more, I've been really trying to include children and young people in the research we're doing, and we wanted, for example, at Brent Cross to do that and thoroughly, and I think we still hope to, but sadly we weren't able to do the baseline work we did last year, and that's largely because we needed to grab the baseline before things got built, and in terms of the ethics and the various things that we need to do, which I'm quite new to. I've never worked with children and young people before. We just didn't have time. It would have taken us an extra 3 or 4 months, I think. But going forwards, we're really keen to do that under someone called Pamela Qualter at Manchester University, who's done fantastic research in Greater Manchester, especially with teenagers. I think 40,000 students now with this what's called the Go Well app, and we're really keen to work with her if possible. And I'm really interested to look at the project you mentioned, because yeah, it's such it was just nowhere near enough data for young people, and such an important area. Yeah, and so your second question, sorry, what was that? Could you remind me that what that was?
Oh, it's really just to say I think there has been, although I couldn't find the link. There's Scotland's been looking at, has a very interesting online tool for urban participation. I just can't remember the name of it.
Right. Oh, okay. You know, I'll be very glad to hear more. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's.
I'll try it somewhere. It's in one of my folders, but
yeah.
It was very interesting, and that same thing that because they were involving the community. When they designed things, they suddenly found out that it was great having certain things designed, but then there was no bus to get there. You know, they hadn't joined all the dots, and the community, and particularly children and teenagers, made comments that nobody else would have picked up.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Yeah, and then I'm really interested to hear more about it. I think in the UK, to be fair, I think it's Scotland and Wales who are leading the charge, and it doesn't surprise me that Scotland has got a tool like that. So, but yeah, really keen to see it.
Wonderful, thank you. Can we, Sherry, just bring in Gary, because he wasn't able to put up his hand, but he was. So Gary, you can unmute and share.
Yes.
Oh, you're already unmuted.
Thanks, Tabir. Yes, there's another person on this group that's from South Africa. It's Anne there. It's from Pinetown, close to Durban. We actually work together on on well-being sort of a project that we have together. Sorry, the other interest that I have, and there's an initiative that's just started, facilitated by the Water Research Commission, is on citizen science. And then I'm also a registered engineer, and I've been sort of pushing green infrastructure, for want of a word, for quite a while. So I made comments about, it's interesting that, where did I say it again? Yes, reducing inequality. That was like one of, can you say outcome? Probably also output, maybe. The art of matching community voice. So what caught my eye with this talk was those 3 areas that sort of intersected for me, the well-being, the citizen science and my engineering approach. So I think a lot of the comments, actually, interesting enough, have come up in terms of, like with Wendy, you know, involving and properly sort of drawing the dots or connecting the dots in terms of communication. You know, and I think citizen science could be worth integrating within this. You know, because I was just looking at all the different measures, and really, I think one of the things that is, I think, critical in citizen science is to get a volume of observations, or high volume of observations, and continuously, and sort of, you know, alive, as it were. And I think that is probably, well, hopefully, you know, we could achieve something like that with our citizen science initiative. And of course, in the whole process is also to, you know, have communities have a voice, you know, to empower communities. So yeah, it just sort of, a lot of things just sort of like linked, you know, with this projects that you're having, or maybe could be linked. That's my comment. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, Jamie, you can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Or Charlie, did you want to follow up?
Oh, you want to use the? Oh, Charlie is going back.
My internet cut out.
Okay.
So I didn't really hear too much of that, but
Okay. No. So yeah, no. So Gary, I think this is citizen science angle in particular, just to pick up on one of the things you were talking about, is really exciting. I've only dabbled with it, you know. I've only ever done a bit with this, and it went okay, and that was especially with trying to work with the community to collect behaviour data, but mostly it's been about trying to make sure that the measures that we're using, and, you know, the index that you adopt, or the surveys that you do, it is relevant to what you know, what's needed locally, or what, you know, people's perceived perceptions of the situation. So that's I think that's really important, and I think it's UCL in particular. I think the Prosperity Group, they've done some really interesting stuff in London, in particular in Euston area of central London, where they're doing some really interesting citizen science work, which I'm not sure it's been published yet, but keen to do more along those lines. And I think the Mohawk tool that we built, it has real strong potential for especially younger people to get involved, I think, with data collection, and, you know, being out in the field, doing behavior observations, and using understanding those types of processes, etc.
Also about,
Thanks.
I was gonna, I think I've caught up on, based on what Jamie had said, about citizen science, but it would be interesting to hear what everyone thinks about how to get more numbers participating. And I mean, we have quite high numbers in terms of the surveys, but like you said, one of the struggles was the community workshops. But does anyone have any experience around encouraging people? One of the ways that we did was using vouchers, which are also a bit of a struggle to, you know, organise, and the admin side of that. But it'd be really good if anyone has any successful projects.
Yeah. How to engage people, it's really, I mean, especially with the postal invitations, you get very, very low response rate, sometimes like 3 or 4% response. So yeah, it's just to echo what Charlie's saying. If anyone else has got good experience, or they know of good ways in which to recruit people, then it's maintaining that engagement with them. Yeah, but glad to hear about.
Thank you. It would be amazing. Yeah, I would love to hear Sherry's comments before we end and close. And while maybe Sherry goes, Charlie or Jamie, you can maybe put in some of the links of the things that you've discussed, so that people can take them with them for future use as well. But Sherry, you can go next.
Thanks, you guys. There's so much here. I just want to say a huge thank you, because the timing of this webinar, from my perspective, could not be better. I am a Canadian on the south coast of England. I live in Hastings. I'm part of what's called the Hastings Garden Town project. And we have just, we're part of the Towns Fund. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but central government, a couple of years ago, another WEAll funding stream for the 100 most disadvantaged towns across the country, got up to 25 million to do all kinds of capital projects around, mostly around employment.
Yeah.
And the local council here, the local borough council, put out a call for community ideas. And I have a background in applied positive psychology. I kind of have to put it out there that I worked in London, did a lot of stuff around the science of happiness for kind of over a decade. One of the series of workshops we ran in Brent Cross 10 years ago, okay, around this stuff. But long story short, the idea we submitted around transforming the town into a garden town was about joining up all the green areas and also building on what was happening here locally. We've got a great ally in Fergus Garrett, who's the head gardener at Great Dixter. We have a massive challenge because this is, essentially been narrowed down to an infrastructure project, which is called Station Front to Seafront. There's a street in the middle of town, which will be amazing. We've got the guys from Sheffield, the Greater Green program in Sheffield behind us as well. But I am the lone voice on the well-being front. And, I'm working with the highways team, and I'm working with, all those guys who are involved in the infrastructure stuff. And it's one of those really interesting challenges about a transformational program that is really about how we live great lives, and that interface between the natural environment and people's lives. And it is absolutely not understood at a local level. And I know this also, Hastings is not unique in this, because I've worked in lots of other towns across the UK. And I'm just wondering whether there's one or two, I guess, you gave some really good recommendations, but one or two things, like as first, like you have to get something, I don't know whether it's about partnership, I don't know what it is exactly, but it's about how do you get that conversation about well-being stitched into this when you have got the people you're working with zero understanding of any of this? What do you do? I mean,
yeah,
I know there's not a silver bullet. I do know this is going to be a lot of work, but
no, it's a really, really great question. And I'm not sure what the magic is. In the context of Brent Cross, I think it really helped that we have that background with the national measure of well-being, and people kind of hearing about that, and it's being in their subconscious, I think, and like, oh, the ONS, this is a national measure, this is must be quite serious, it's not just candy floss, all very sweet with no substance, and that, I think that helps a great deal. And then honestly, I think it's a bit of luck. I think it's less luck now, but it was going back a few years, is that you have someone on the client side and on the lead that gets it, and they're not overly dismissive, because this is subjective well-being, and they're interested in the experiential side of things, and so especially what we've had at Brent Cross is really enlightened on the client side, thinking and openness, so if that's not there, then it's how you cultivate that, I suppose. And I suppose it's motivating with people with opportunities for funding and opportunities to be part of this new agenda, and so if there are increasingly funding now, at least in the UK and I think internationally, that where they're asking people to measure these things, it's been taken more seriously, like OECD was mentioned before, but so it's dangling that carrot, I suppose, and then it's also been to show how they could be part of a wider international agenda. There's something it's really exciting, and it is genuinely quite new, I suppose, and people generally, I don't know yet. I'm not sure exactly, but especially trying to excite people with the novelty of this, I think can be helpful. But I totally agree. I work with a lot of engineers, and they can be really quite skeptical at times. They still are after 5-10 years of talking about this.
I did a lot of work in London around this, and I did a lot of work investing in training those people to understand the science of well-being. When you come to a small town where the council has zero money, in fact, they're probably going to declare bankruptcy in the next couple of months. That's where we're really coming a cropper, because it's so difficult to find. There's no leaders.
No.
They're just people who are just desperately clinging to their desks right now, and they're so depleted.
No, it's true.
It's amazing to hear what you guys have been doing. It's so helpful, I have to say. So
thank you so much, Sherry. That's me. That's great to hear. Thank you. Whilst I remember the ESG movement, I think that's especially now. I think to be so far as I understand, the Oxford University, the Centre for Wellbeing, they're really trying to embed the science of wellbeing in the ESG frameworks. So again, that's a potential avenue, I think, for exploration, and that would be very interesting if the ESG investors who bankroll all these projects could even provide 0.001% of their of their cash flow for funding and for doing these types of things. That would be really, really big deal. Yeah. But great. It'd be lovely to speak more, Sherry, at some point.
be great. Yeah. I'll be in touch. Thanks.
So I think the file's dropped out. I'm not sure. Our host, So unless there's any questions or anything further, should we leave it there? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I'm going to go and take my daughter swimming. So I wish you all a good day, whatever time of day it is, or night. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yes.